Welcome back. Today's episode is packed. I'll answer some of the most frequently asked questions I get, like how I decide what to paint, how I compose my pieces, and how I keep my colors clean and not muddy, and even some of the tips I have for saving money on supplies without sacrificing quality. This is the first episode of my new podcast format. If you're listening instead of watching, the audio for these podcasts is accompanied by videos of me working on recent paintings. I've discovered that my audience likes to watch the painting process. Recording my sessions serves two purposes. The first is that it gives me something to accompany the audio of my shows for those of you who prefer YouTube over straight audio podcasts. The second thing recording my sessions achieves is it gets me to my easel to paint so that I have something to record and share with you. You will hear me tell you time and again on this podcast, if you're an artist, you do you. You can't create according to what you think you should be doing. There is no right way. There's only the way that inspires you to keep creating. For me, a big part of that is staying connected to you. You are a big part of what motivates me to show up at my easel. Thanks. How do I decide what to paint? This can be a tough one, and not because you don't have ideas. If you've been listening for a while, then you know I don't believe in creative block due to lack of ideas. I believe most of us get stuck because we have too many ideas and not enough focus. Working on multiple paintings at once has helped me with this. I just wrapped up a figurative piece. I started a new trail cam painting, and I'm mid-process through a new chicken painting. So, the figurative piece is a modern take on the Annunciation of Mary, and one of my favorite muses posed for this one, really bringing the idea to life. The trail cam painting came from a series of wildlife shots taken from one of the cameras we keep on the trails at our camp. I cropped and composed the painting in Photoshop to match a cradle board proportion that I found at Hobby Lobby. It was 2 feet long by a foot high. That's not a standard size, so my thought was that it would be hard to frame. But when I got home and I started flipping through trail cam footage, I realized that the wide proportion actually worked out great for these trail cam shots. In particular, I was looking at shots of deer in the woods. And so I decided to go back and get it, because with the depth of this cradle board, I wouldn't necessarily need a frame. I could just paint around the edges of the cradle board. The chicken painting inspiration was one of a series that came from a friend who graciously shared her own photos of her chickens and gave me permission to paint from them. So having at least 2 or 3 paintings in progress keeps me from burning out and overworking any one painting. I work for a period of time and then I take a break and switch paintings. This allows me to have one in the messy beginning stages when I'm still figuring everything out, another in the more relaxing middle phase. Sometimes this is the messy middle, but a lot of times once the painting is set and you have your proportions corrected, it often gives you a phase that you can relax in a little more while you're playing with the color values and exploring your hues. And I've got one painting in the stage of being almost finished, which feels satisfying because you're producing. So as artists and creatives, we get lots of ideas. My advice is to follow your curiosity and get in the habit of collecting reference images that you're legally allowed to use. Over time, patterns will start to emerge as you collect more and more of your inspiration. That's where you'll discover your voice, not by forcing a style, but by noticing which subjects keep calling you back. A note here, if you go to stock images for your reference, be sure to check out the rules around their licensing, as some stock image sites allow you to use a photo on a billboard, but not to create art for resale. I've looked around quite a bit on this, and licensing rules can be confusing. I try to avoid dealing with stock image permissions as much as possible by taking my own photos. If I have a friend who can get photos of a subject I love, such as their horses or their chickens, I ask permission to use the photos they send me, and I get the permission via text or email, or ideally, I get a signature on a photo release form. I'll drop one of my photo release forms into the bonus vault that you can take a look at for reference. You can find those by signing up to be a podcast insider in the sidebar at passionatepainterpodcast.com. I have also checked the Wikimedia Commons website for images that allow artists to use them for free, but I'm also going to recommend here that you check the permissions per photo, as I've discovered that even there are notations that some photos are not allowed to be used without attribution. So while doable, this can be tricky when you've made a painting, because you can add a note on the title card, for instance, in a gallery or a show, but it's awkward and not guaranteed to follow the art if it's sold. So yes, you can send the art off with paperwork notations that the painting was inspired by a specific image, but it's easiest if you can get images that are free and clear of having to note an attribution. The one stock site I've been able to use with a lot of success is Unsplash Plus. So that's the Plus designation. It's a higher level designation and price point than just using unsplash.com. I still confirm licensing per image, just to be sure, but I've had good luck finding what I need so far using that site when I do need to go to stock for reference. And ideally, that would be just for part of a painting. You really want to try not to completely replicate someone else's photograph. So this goes back to my trail cam usage. For my purposes, which is capturing bird photos at my feeder or deer on the trail, for instance, it works great. It may seem limiting because the cameras are stationary generally for a number of days at a time, but it allows me to swap out great lighting, for instance, of a certain scene where the background is fixed, and keep an animal pose that I like in the same scene without skewing the perspective. The key here is that the animals get used to the camera and they ignore it after a while. So I still rove around taking individual photos or move the cameras from place to place to mix up the settings and compositions for paintings. And naturally, if you're a plein air painter, you're on site. So every painting is different and you don't have to worry about having a camera that you've got to move from place to get different shots. But that's another episode entirely. As someone who paints at all kinds of odd hours around my job, I prefer to be in my studio. The bottom line for productivity is to figure out how you like to work and go with that. Okay, so let's talk about composition because it's a game changer. Lately, I've been working with trail cam footage. I'll pick several shots from the same angle, one with the best lighting, another with better animal poses, and then combine them into a single composition in Photoshop. If you have the luxury of working with a program like Photoshop to compose your paintings, it really gives you an advantage in that you can crop the image, the reference image, to the same proportion as the canvas you're going to be using. And this is going to help avoid a lot of mistakes regarding accuracy when you're translating the reference image over to what you're actually painting. So I crop everything to fit the proportions of the canvas I'm using. I often overlay compositional guides like the golden mean, the golden triangle, or the Fibonacci spiral to ensure a strong composition. I have a free ebook called Composing Art with Confidence if you want to try this. It includes printable templates of these compositional tools that you can use with your paintings. You can grab them by signing up to be a podcast insider on my website at passionatepainterpodcast.com. Look for it in the sidebar. And for those of you who want to dive even deeper, I cover these tools in depth with examples throughout art history in my design and composition course bundle. Podcast insiders get reusable coupons for the best pricing on all of my online courses. Now, once I've got the final reference image put together, I print it out with a 1-inch grid overlaid over the photo. And I tile it if necessary, meaning if the actual painting is going to be larger than a letter-sized sheet of paper, I print it out on multiple pages and I tape it together. I grid both the reference and the drawing so that everything stays proportionate. I lay a sheet of clean tracing paper over a blank grid that's also 1-inch by 1-inch squares, and I draw out what I see on my reference according to the grid. Gridding is a bit of work up front, but it has been worthwhile for me. Sometimes I do just start a painting by directly sketching onto a blank canvas. That can work too, but I've found that if you're going for realism, you either do the corrective work on the front end through composing and gridding your drawing, or on the back end making corrections as you go. Moving a perfectly painted ear that I discovered too late was 1/4 of an inch too far to the left made doing the grid work up front worth it for me. These days, I save my spontaneous, direct-to-canvas sketch work for small paintings. and I correct as I go, using my thumb to count off distances on my brush handle. My Portrait Code Masterclass does contain several demonstrations of different ways to begin a painting, including the direct sketch method and the grid work method. It also includes a transfer method, and they're all taught with video tutorials. Okay, so how do I keep my paintings from getting muddy? The dreaded mud. When I was learning to paint, especially skin tones, I struggled a lot with muddy colors. But now I follow 2 simple rules that I wish my instructors had shared with me in college. Number 1, do not use black. Now, black isn't evil, but it can be dangerous in the wrong hands. If you're not careful, it can kill your colors. So instead, I darken my colors by using their complements. This means the opposite color to the color you're using on the color wheel. Want to darken yellow? Add purple. It works like a charm, and it keeps your mixtures vibrant. For more information about this, you can download my free guide to non-muddy skin tones, which actually applies to keeping all your colors not muddy, in the download vault for my podcast insiders. This free guide includes skin tone swatches of colors I mixed myself and a color wheel for painters that shows which pigments complement each other best on the color wheel according to actual paint pigments. For example, burnt sienna is basically a dark yellow. So if you want to darken it, you can reach for one of the purple pigments, like ultramarine blue, which is actually a violet blue. Okay, tip 2, limit your color palette. Limiting your color palette helps you keep your mixes clean and cohesive. So while I have a variety of colors, and sometimes more than one of each type of color, I try to limit them to usually a maximum of 2 per color. Again, these aren't hard, fast, inflexible rules, but I do try to limit them. So I don't have 7 different colors of red. And yes, you can get many, many colors of each pigment. But for example, I will have a warm and a cool red. Maybe there's a cadmium red, and for a cool red, I'm going to use alizarin permanent. I like to have a warm light brown and a warm dark brown. 1 or 2 blues, depending on the painting. A few yellows, usually a primary, so a bright yellow, and an ochre or sienna, like a raw sienna, which is going to be similar in hue to yellow ochre. And even though I said 1 or 2 colors of each, keeping in mind that when I say 2 different browns, technically brown is in the yellow family, so maybe 4 yellows total if you're including brown. It depends on what you're painting. If I'm painting animals and things from nature, there's probably going to be a couple of browns in addition to a couple of yellows. I also may have a couple of greens. I try to limit those to 2, a light and a dark. Again, it depends on what you're painting and what your needs are. And I'm also going to use that dark version of the green to darken my reds if necessary. You can mix your greens too if you want to stick to your basic red, yellow, and blue color palette to make everything else. I do use white. I try to use it sparingly. Keep in mind you can use the light value of a color to lighten up another color, such as a very light yellow to lighten a red if you don't want to get too chalky. I go more in depth on color mixing in my Color Theory and Perspective online course bundle and naturally in the masterclass. And you'll hear me talking about it as it arises on the podcast. Another tip, keep the paint tubes you're using in a basket until a painting is finished. If you take a long break and you want to put those paints away, I strongly recommend you jot down what you used so you don't forget when you return to the painting. It may sound like a pain, but trying to figure out which pigments you used a few weeks after you started a painting and need to mix up matching hues to jump back in is a much bigger pain. Okay, less frequently asked question. Supplies are expensive. How do I save money if I'm not yet selling enough paintings to cover the cost of my supplies? Okay, let's talk about money because, yep, art supplies can be really expensive and framing can be even more expensive if you don't do it in a cost-effective way. But I found some tricks to make it manageable. I personally like to shop at Hobby Lobby, mostly because I like to be able to grab the supplies the same day if I'm in a hurry, but also because Hobby Lobby runs sales on a regular basis on brushes, canvases, and frames, sometimes up to 50% off. So I stop in periodically, and whenever I see a sale running, I like to grab brushes. Brushes can range anywhere from a few dollars each to extremely expensive, and I personally don't buy $100 brushes. I think there are very few brushes that are going to hold up long enough for me to justify that kind of expense. What I do is I grab the kind of brushes that I like as far as quality and springiness, and I get them when they go on sale. So whenever I'm in the store and I see a brush sale, I might grab 3 or 4 just to have them ready and have a backup inventory on hand. The same goes for framing. When I know I'm going to need a frame for a show or a client, I start keeping my eye out early. And longtime listeners may know my big tip for framing on a budget: go to Goodwill or St. Vincent de Paul or Salvation Army with a measuring tape. I look for standard size frames like 16 by 20, 8 by 10. In these particular places, you're likely to find old frames that are often real wood, super sturdy, and dirt cheap. You're not going to be contending with very, very heavy and fragile plaster frames like you may find new in stores these days, or even worse, in my opinion, are the hollow plastic frames. I love a good solid wood frame. And when people turn in their frames to Goodwill, it's often after estate sales, things they have left over. And these are the old-fashioned real frames that are high quality. So whenever possible, I buy my painting support, meaning my panels or canvases, to fit the frames that I have, not the other way around. Because when you end up taking an odd-sized piece of art to get framed custom, you could be looking at hundreds of dollars. Even without the glass, even without the matting, a straight-up frame for an oil painting is going to be expensive if you're paying by the inch. I also keep framing hardware on hand: D-rings, brackets, wire, and brown paper with double-sided tape to seal the back. It saves time and gives your work a polished professional finish. Now, of course, the exception to DIY framing like this is if you're working with a gallery with specific framing requirements. And of course, if you're working with a gallery, you're probably already selling your paintings and hopefully making enough that you can justify framing consistently according to their specifications, which may be all of the frames have to match and be the same style and color and width. In such a case, I still recommend, when possible, economizing. So this might mean going online to framing wholesalers where you can at least get better pricing or discounts for buying in volume and get those matching frames so they're all the same if that's what your gallery requires. But for local shows or personal sales, budget-friendly framing is absolutely the way to go. In general, go with the widest frames you can find when framing your paintings. I recommend a 3-inch wide frame when you can find them. Even wider, try a 4-inch frame if you've got a large painting. This is where regular visits to check in at thrift stores can come in handy. On average, I usually come away with plenty of frames to work with. So there you have it: how I choose what to paint, how I compose my paintings up front to avoid headaches later so I can enjoy the painting process more, how I avoid mud when mixing my colors, and how I save money on supplies and framing. If you found today's episode helpful, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or in YouTube if you're watching this video. Share with a friend, or tag the Passionate Painter Podcast in your studio shots on Instagram. I love seeing what you're working on. Don't forget to sign up to be a podcast insider at passionatepainterpodcast.com to grab all those free goodies and get insider-only reusable coupons on my online courses. I promise not to overwhelm your email with newsletters. If you've been a podcast insider for any length of time, you know that I don't actually send out a whole lot of newsletters, because I'd rather spend my time on the mic producing podcasts. And you also know that I love to share whatever goodies I can think up with you, whether they're tips, cheat sheets, or checklists. Keep creating from your heart and don't forget to enjoy the process. Until next time, go make something.